What's going on, ballers? Welcome into another edition of Draft Man Standing. It's Jack and John, and we are here today to discuss some overrated draft prospects opposed to last week's underrated draft prospects, and as well continuing our first round projections for the NFL draft with the Green Bay Packers and Arizona Cardinals today. So, John, I know we're starting with the NBA, but anything from you on the NFL draft side you want to say before we get into this?
There hasn't been too much news, surprisingly, out of the NFL.
Stream here, John.
Okay.
It seems to be, and it's resumed. Perfect.
Okay.
So we're back. But yeah, I think that's a good point on the combine being movers. I was hoping though that you would talk a little bit about this Bill Polian controversy, because I think it's very interesting, just based on the fact that Bill Polian obviously has a large track record of success in the NFL.
Yeah.
But his opinion on Lamar Jackson being a wide receiver has been consistent, and has also been consistently, much maligned amongst draft nicks, I would say, and. What are your opinions on that? Because I know it's tough with the amount of respect you have to give to somebody like Bill Polian, but at the same time, that view is something that you've already expressed such, distaste for.
Yeah, I'm biased here, obviously, because I'm a big fan of Lamar Jackson. I think he's better than Josh Allen and Baker Mayfield, and I think he should be a top 5 quarterback this year, top 5 pick. But Bill Polian, I feel like as Bill Polian has strayed farther and farther from his stint as a general manager with the Colts, and the more time he spent on TV at ESPN, some of his opinions have gotten more and more just insane. He called Lamar Jackson short. Lamar Jackson's 6'3". What is Bill Polian talking about? So I really don't know where this Lamar Jackson should be a wide receiver thing. Why? I mean, he has better passing mechanics than Mayfield and Allen, in my opinion, and he's not that far from a guy like Sam Darnold. Josh Rosen, obviously one of the more polished guys in the draft, but I really don't understand where it's coming from. I don't want to say it's a racial thing because he's a black quarterback, but I don't really understand why you look at Lamar Jackson and you think he needs to be a wide receiver. He's too short. He's taller than Baker Mayfield, obviously, and he's right on par with guys like Josh Rosen and Sam Darnold. So, Bill Polian, I don't know where it's coming from.
I do think, though, at the Combine, he's going to measure shorter than 6'3". I don't think he's nearly as big as Rosen and Darnold.
I don't think he's 6'4", 6'5". I think 6'3", 6'2" is about where he's going to be, and that's not short for a quarterback at all.
No, I'm definitely not saying he's short. I just think he's going to be closer to the midpoint between Rosen and Darnold to Mayfield than he is closer to Darnold and Rosen in terms of size.
That's fair.
But with that being said, and the controversy on Lamar Jackson, I think it's fair to move into some overrated draft prospects here. So starting off on the NBA side, I think first off, especially at this point in the season, it has to be, unfortunately, Trae Young. And it's tough because he's in such a tough situation where the team is very dependent on his ability to create open opportunities for his teammates, as well as score for himself. But when they've gone from number 5 in the country just about a month ago to now number 8 of 10 teams in the Big 12, it's tough for as somebody who dissects the draft, it's tough to say that's all on Trae Young, and that's going to be a lot of the draft evaluator's job, is to parse out what they feel Trae Young, the weaknesses that have shown up, what will translate, and what are just because defenses can cue in on him so heavily. But he certainly is no longer a top 3 potential pick, and at this point, it wouldn't surprise me if he ends up going, closer to number 10, somewhere in that 8 to 12 range rather than that
Right.
top 3, top 5 range that he was talked about just a few short weeks ago.
Right, and Jack, to give you some credit, you've been saying from the beginning when I've talked to you about Trae Young that you don't think he's a top 3 type guy. You think he belongs a little deeper in the lottery because of some of the deficiencies he does have in his game. So, do you think that ultimately, 8 to 10 is his rightful spot for everything you've seen from him as a prospect?
I think so, and I think also it's because of how talented the big men in this class are.
Right.
I think maybe in a different year, Trae is moving up a little bit higher, but just the thing is for NBA GMs, a lot of times with these top 5 picks, most of them are looking for risk-averse selections. And Trae Young is not going to be that, especially when you compare him with guys like Mo Bamba and Jaren Jackson. And those aren't even the top tier, big men in this class. And that's not even mentioning Luka Doncic's or Bagley or Porters or Aytons.
Right.
And so right there you have 6 guys who I think, even with Michael Porter most likely missing this entire season, are surely ahead of Trae Young. And so that's really, it's partially because of his play, but also partially just the rest of the talent in this class. But
right.
Moving on to the second guy I have on here, and his being overrated and fall in his draft stock, and Robert Williams, who I've discussed on one other occasion here when we talked about draft fallers. To me, I don't think he's fallen enough. He stayed in the late lottery range because of his tremendous athleticism, his ability to be a leaper with a 40-plus inch vertical at 6'9", 6'10". But there's only so far that athleticism can take you. And I've seen too many guys with his traits not succeed at the next level, or maybe just not pan out and kind of be guys who rotate around the league. And I don't know. At this point with Robert Williams, that's just where I would say he is. And so to me, for a team to take a chance on him in the late lotteries is a bit too premature, especially with some of the other talented guys. If you're going to take a chance on him in somewhere in the 20s, okay. But not in the late lottery. That's too soon.
So, Jack, you're saying that his athleticism as a positive is being... What do you think is the biggest negative to his game that's being underrated by people who still think he's a lottery pick?
Yeah, he just doesn't have basketball skills yet. And to me, I thought the jump, or the potential jump at least, from his freshman to sophomore year would show me that, the type of development he could show at the next level. It's not that I expected him to go from being a guy who's heavily developed, or rather reliant on his athleticism from year 1 to year 2 to make that big of a change, but rather just to show signs that he was improving in other areas of his game. He hasn't done that for me.
Right, and that's definitely a big concern.
Of course. And lastly, the last guy for me in terms of overrated draft prospects is Mitchell Robinson, the center who almost went to Western Kentucky and then did not. And to be quite frank with you, John, I haven't seen a ton of Mitchell Robinson tape. Obviously, he didn't play any college basketball this season. I've just seen some highlights. But really, to me, it's the essence of his decision, the decision-making, and the types of players we've seen take a similar path previously, and the low hit rate that they've had.
Right.
Guys who don't play in college basketball and play overseas have a low success rate as it is, but a guy who didn't even go play overseas and has just been training for the season for the NBA draft and still is regarded as a mid-20s first-round pick, to me, it's too high. I know just from last year there's Terrence Ferguson, who's shown some flashes for the Thunder, but has really struggled with an increase in playing time after Andre Roberson's injury. And Ferguson at least played for the Adelaide 36ers in Australia. Robinson, on the other hand, hasn't played a meaningful basketball game since high school. And to me, there's just too many red flags with him to say he's worthy of a guaranteed contract in the first round.
All right, so now moving on from some NBA overrated draft prospects to some NFL ones. We're going to start here with a guy who I have a lot of concerns about. That's Tremaine Edmonds, the linebacker from Virginia Tech. There's one thing that he kind of, honestly, Jack, he's kind of a lot like Robert Williams in that his athletic skill set is rare. He's a specimen as a linebacker. He's 6'4", 250, and he runs. He's probably going to run a high or a low 4.6 40, maybe even 4.5.
Wow.
He's fast. He's a fast linebacker, but the problem is his football instincts are not there. He is not a very instinctive player. He diagnoses plays poorly. Often you'll see him run to the wrong gap, run to the wrong At Virginia Tech, I'm not sure if they coach him just to run to the first gap that he sees, and if they do, then that's more of a indictment on the defensive coaching than on him. But again and again, I watch his tape and I see him just totally run himself out of plays where the running back is able to go to where he was as opposed to where he's going and run for a big gain. So Edmonds to me is a guy who needs a lot of seasoning. I still think he's, a solid player. I think he's a guy worthy of being taken in the first 100 picks, but to say he's a better linebacker right away than Roquan Smith or even someone like Rashaan Evans, I think is pretty ridiculous. I think if you're going to take Tremaine Edmonds, you have to be confident in your linebackers coach and in your defensive coordinator that you're going to be able to slow the game down for him. And even then, all the coaching in the world, if it's just not in a guy, it's just not in him. So Edmonds, to me, I think should be more talked about as a second or third round player than as a first round player or even top 10.
Now, John, Edmonds is extremely young, still 19.
Yes, he's 19. Yes.
Yeah. So
that should be noted.
Yes. So how much, we've seen the only guy who I can think of who's similar in terms of football and youth was Amobi Okoye.
Right.
And
he didn't pan out.
Right, exactly. And so my question to you is, how much do you think those football instincts can develop? Because he is still only 19. There's still plenty of time for him to get more reps. But,
right.
At the same time, your feel for the game is something that is so innate that usually it's not something that can be developed. You're not going to go from a 2 or a 3 in terms of your football instincts to a 10. You might go from a 2 or a 3 to a 5, but you're not going to make that big of a jump.
Yeah, exactly. So that's why I have a lot of concerns about him. Maybe he does get a really good coach. Maybe the light bulb turns on for him faster than I expect it will.
Right.
But that's really going to, how fast he learns and how much the game slows down for him is really going to be telling of what kind of football player he is in the future. If he's Amobi Okoye, a guy with immense talent and very young, and Okoye was a guy who was very intelligent. I think he's a heart surgeon now, post NFL career.
I do remember him being very intelligent.
He's a doctor.
Right.
So what's that?
You're right. He was. I remember he had skipped at least one grade, if not 2.
Right. Yeah, he's a very smart person, and I don't know if Tremaine Edmonds, is smart outside the football field, but Okoye just couldn't get down the techniques and the polish to be a great football player. And Edmonds, I have those concerns with him. I'd take him in the second round, but in the first round, top 10, I think that's worrisome. So moving on here to my next overrated guy, that's going to be Courtland Sutton, the SMU wide receiver, who I liked last year, and this year I found myself liking him a lot less. I love size. I love his ability to go and out-rebound the ball from corners, but I have some concerns about his route running. I don't think he's the best route runner. And for a guy who's that big and does not run that fast, you need to have great route running to get separation, because simply being 6'4", 216 is not going to be enough to generate consistent separation at the NFL level. And while I think his hands are good, he does have some drops. He does have some times where he doesn't track the ball extremely well or put his hands in the right position to make a clean catch. So, that's one issue where if you're a possession receiver and you're not going to catch the ball 9 out of 10 times, if it can be more like 7, that's going to be an issue if you don't have speed to at least, um, fall back on a little bit if you don't have the best hands in the world. So the route running, the speed, to me, I think Sutton is going to be more of a wide receiver 2 at the next level, and you should not be drafting wide receivers 2 in the first round. You should be drafting them in the second or third round, and I think that's a much better landing spot for Sutton is in the second or third round.
John, to me, your description of Sutton reminds me a little bit of our conversation from last year's draft class on Mike Williams, where the prospect looks like a number 1 receiver, but really be a number 2. And it sounds like maybe Sutton's not quite the athlete that Mike Williams is.
No, definitely not.
But at the same time, he doesn't have maybe the injury concerns that Williams had.
Right, and I would say Sutton is a better receiver. The biggest problem I had with Mike Williams last year was that he didn't make clean receptions. He let the ball get into his pads a whole lot.
Right.
So yeah, I would agree with you, Jack. I think there are some similarities there to Mike Williams, and unfortunately Williams, drafted in the first round by Los Angeles Chargers, and then missed basically his entire rookie season with injury. So we never really got to see how good he was with Los Angeles. But I think comparing Sutton to Mike Williams is not out of the question. It's a pretty good comparison. And then the last guy I have here is Marcus Davenport, the edge rusher from Texas San Antonio. And I don't want this to be misconstrued as that I don't like Davenport. I like him. I think he's a first-round type player. But I don't think he's a top 10 player. And that's because while I think he is very effective, while I think he has some good polish and some good instincts to him, he's not a superb athlete. And, if you're going to take an edge player, I would much rather take someone like Harold Landry, obviously Bradley Chubb, over Davenport because they're just better athletes. And when you're going to take a guy in top 10, top 15, maybe even top 5, you want him, and they're going to be an edge rusher, you want him to be a great athlete. And when there are great athletes in this class who are not that far behind or even better than Davenport is, I would rather take one of them over him. He also is not completely polished as a pass rusher just yet. He really doesn't have a fully developed set of pass rush moves. So coming in, he's going to be really a force as a run stuffer, and he's going to, get a few sacks here and there. The ceiling for him is pretty high, but I don't think he's a surefire top 10, top 5, top player. I think he's a guy who should go more toward the bottom half of the first round or early second round.
Got it. Well, that's a perfect place for us to transition into the Green Bay Packers here, because I think the edge rusher position should be right at the top of their priority list for their draft pick here in the first round. And with that being said, when you look at the roster and they have Nick Perry, who they just gave a decent contract to. Clay Matthews is still there. They have a couple of other younger pass rushers who, depending on your view of them, they were more mid-round guys. And so, if you're higher on them than not, this may or may not make more sense. But to me, they don't have that premier guy, that premier pass rusher anymore. Clay Matthews isn't that. And I don't think Nick Perry really ever was. And so, to me, if you're the Packers, you have this situation where you rarely ever get to draft this high in the first round. Usually it's somewhere in the mid to late 20s. And this is your opportunity to go get one of those freak athletes on the edge, like, as John mentioned, Harold Landry. I think that would be a great pick for the Packers if they're able to get him here. Because really, Clay Matthews has one more year on his deal, so they could keep him for this year, or, quite frankly, it is possible they could cut him. And, they just need somebody to generate consistent pressure. On the flip side, what else could they look at? Maybe they look secondary. They look at a corner like somebody we've mentioned a ton on here already, Denzel Ward. And I think on offense, interior offensive line could be potentially looked at here as well. Maybe one of John's prospects here in Will Hernandez could be the selection for the Packers. But I think those would be the order of where the Packers will look. And I think, edge rusher should be the clear priority just because of how valuable it is in the league. But also, it's been a couple seasons since they've gotten that high-level production from someone on the edge. John?
Yeah, okay. I think I lost you there for a second. Can you repeat what you said last?
Sure, yeah. So I just think that, the Packers having the opportunity to go edge rusher here, I think the clear needs are edge rusher, corner, and interior offensive line. Maybe you look at receiver, but I think it's a bit too soon. And so really, when you have the opportunity to add a Harold Landry at this point in the draft, at least ideally, it's too good of an opportunity for them to pass up to add that level of impact player to their defense.
Yeah, I agree. I think Harold Landry would be a perfect player to put in Green Bay. Maybe even they could look at inside linebacker. They'd probably be reaching a little bit because I assume someone like Roquan Smith is going to be gone by the time they pick. And then the next best player there would probably be Leighton Vander Esch from Boise State, who I like, but might be a little early to pick him at 14. Or Rashaan Evans from Alabama. So might reach a little bit there, but I think Harold Landry would be the perfect pick for Green Bay if he's still on the board. Now, moving on here to the Arizona Cardinals, I think the Cardinals have to go get a quarterback. They really don't have a good transition plan now that Carson Palmer has retired. And yes, they have some needs elsewhere on the roster. Back next to Patrick Peterson, certainly. They also have some needs on the offensive line, but I think going forward, they need someone to rally around from the signal caller position, and I think this is the right draft to get one. I think if Lamar Jackson, circling back to Lamar Jackson, it feels like we talk about him every week. I think if he's on the board there for Arizona, I think they should go ahead and take him and pair him with David Johnson and Larry Fitzgerald if they keep John Brown, and just have a solid passing game, running game offense. You can do a lot with. You can do a lot with those guys, with Larry Fitzgerald, with David Johnson as a runner, as a receiver, with Lamar Jackson. Hey, if you want him to play a little wide receiver and some wildcat type stuff, maybe you can do that. Not really. You don't want to get your quarterback hurt, but you'll have a really interesting offense and athletic backfield. So I think Lamar Jackson should definitely be among the top considerations. If they don't want to look at quarterback, if they want to wait, or if they feel confident in Drew Stanton as a bridge guy until they find a quarterback they really like, maybe going forward someone like Connor Williams if he's still on the board, or Will Hernandez, maybe Carlton Davis, or Denzel Ward, Josh Jackson will probably be off the board. But someone like, Carlton Davis or Isaiah Oliver at corner to pair next to Patrick Peterson would be pretty interesting and pretty enticing for that defense.
Right, and both of those corners you just mentioned there would play well next to Peterson because they wouldn't necessarily be tasked with creating turnovers, just preventing big plays, and I think those would both
they wouldn't have to face the opposing team's number one receiver.
Exactly. So I think that'd be a great situation for both of those guys. If I were one of them, I'd be ecstatic if I got to go to Arizona and play across from Patrick Peterson. But in terms of the other stuff you said, offensive line definitely could be something they look at. And quarterback, I think it's going to just depend on how the dominoes fall in the beginning first, 5 or 6 picks of the draft, and how many quarterbacks fly off then, because that's really going to dictate, and that's why it's really tough what we're doing here and trying to project out. But it's really going to dictate, who's available when, but also what other talent falls, because maybe somebody else falls in the draft and Arizona really likes them, or who knows. But I think they're in a very interesting situation where, as John said, they clearly need a new direction, a new signal caller, but they're at the same time at a tough point in the draft to really say definitively they can get their guy there.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think they're going to have to take a quarterback at some point in this draft, even if they wait until the second or third round. They just need to get someone who they can at least try to develop. But I do think that Arizona at least is in a good spot where they can get a player who will be able to help their team right away, whether it is a quarterback or not, in the first round.
Absolutely. All right, well, that's it for Draft Man Standing, episode 7. Wow, John, we're moving along here.
We're moving.
We've got just under 10 weeks left until the NFL draft here, so stay tuned with us at Talking Ball as we discuss all things NBA and NFL draft. See you guys next time. Peace.